The Boys Who Challenged Hitler, Chapter 8. An Evening Alone. Nud Peterson. One night after an especially raucous Churchill Club meeting, I sat in my room with the door shut and tried to stop my head from spinning. It was amazing how suddenly the old monastery could go from bedlam to silence when the last member pulled the door shut behind him. I rubbed my hands together to keep warm. There wasn't enough coal in Denmark to heat this place. I looked around my room. My living space was actually more a studio than a room. Canvases were stacked in corners, and sketches were strewn all over the floor. Paintbrushes protruded from cloudy water in jars that occupied nearly every flat surface. I painted the way other guys played sports. Landscapes and portraits and abstractions covered my walls, the ceiling, even the window curtains. I had painted half a scene on my desk. Now I realized I had never completed it. My parents saved money to send Jens, the family golden boy, off to college, and who could blame them? Jens was already respected as the best math student at Cathedral School, but my parents did something special for me as well. When we moved to Aalborg, Father opened up an account in my name at the local art store. I could purchase all the brushes and easels and tubes of paints I wanted, and as a result, I could hardly make my way around this little room without putting a shoe through a canvas or knocking over a jar. But tonight, I didn't even feel like painting. There was too much to think about. War shadowed everything. I pulled the window curtain back. What were all those cars doing at Badolfi Square? The lines of vehicles kept getting longer and longer. Would they soon be on a transport ship to Norway and then on another to cross the North Sea? Were the Germans staging to invade England? I glared at the German soldier guarding the post office. He shared a round-the-clock shift with two other soldiers. I could see one of them every time I looked outside. My mind drifted. What would life be like if Germany won? If Hitler had his way, we'd be part of an Übrig, held up to the world as a master race, with defeated people forced to work as slaves to satisfy their masters. If the bloody Nazis won, the Churchill Club, or something like us, would have to move even further underground. Someone would have to keep hope alive. We would be forced to continue resisting in an occupied country after the war. I wished I had someone to talk with about all this. Sure, Jens was my brother, and he shared the danger of our work, but he wasn't someone I could confide in. We competed over everything. It could get ridiculous. Back in Odense, we both fell in love with the American movie star Deanna Durbin. We had one photo of her, and we tore it in half so that neither of us could have her to himself. Same thing with our record player, a gramophone. It had a detachable crank arm that you had to use to get it started. I would take the record of Deanna Durbin singing, and Jens would grab the arm. We could only hear her when we were together, the last place we wanted to be. Bjorg shared my sense of humor, but he was too young and didn't go to my school, and I was not all that close to the others in the Churchill Club, even though most were in my grade. We shared a common passion to awaken Denmark. That was enough. No, I wanted to open my heart to a particular someone special. Greth Robark was a student in the 9th grade, like me, tall and blonde. She wore no makeup, but had a natural beauty and a wonderful smile. Though she was in my grade, I had no classes with her. She was in the advanced classes. I was in the B group. The closest we ever came to exchanging a word was a magical day we crossed paths in the yard between classes. She had a box of small sandwiches and stopped to offer me one. I couldn't say a word. In fact, I was so flustered I didn't even return to school that day. I walked home and lay down on the couch in Father's office. Mother, without asking questions, served me warm tea and stayed with me. My shyness didn't stop me from having heroic fantasies starring the two of us. One was set in Badolfi Square. The Churchill Club had climbed to the top of the church tower, and we were hurling mortar shells and bombs onto the square below. Flames erupted from the German vehicles, one car setting the next ablaze in a furious chain of pyrotechnics. In the most glorious moment, I drove into the square in a small open car. I stood up in the car with one foot on the seat, waving a pistol with my free hand. By now, the square was an inferno. Bombs and exploding engines threw sheets of brilliant light, illuminating charred, frightened faces peering out from the shadows. I drove on through a hail of bullets, and suddenly, over the whine of lead, I heard a scream from the top floor of a building on the square. I looked up, and there was Greth, standing, eyes wide, her sweet hands pressed to her mouth, her slender form illuminated by fire. We locked eyes meaningfully, and then I lost sight of her. The fantasy usually popped about then, crushed beneath the weight of its own absurdity. The pitiful truth was, I had never had a serious conversation with any girl, not even my sister Gertrude. When I first got to Cathedral School, I tried to impress girls by getting in fights. That's the way you had gained status in my old school at Odense. But that had been an all-boys school where you settled everything with your fists behind the school by the statue of the businessman Carl Frederick Teitgen. Now I'd knock somebody down and look around and see girls backing away. They seemed horrified, not impressed. Finally, somebody convinced me I'd do better with girls by opening doors for them and inviting them to precede me in line or figuring out how to help them with their coats. So far, nearly one semester into cathedral school, that hadn't worked any better. I was still light years away from kissing my first girl, with no candidates on the horizon. There was just so much to think about. We of the Churchill Club were brave but naive and undisciplined. Just days before, at a skating rink, Jens had skated up behind a German soldier and kicked him in the leg. The guy howled in pain and took off after Jens, who was chased down and taken to the police station. Now his name was enshrined in a registry of those who opposed the Nazis, just what we needed. And it was only by the greatest good fortune that Helg had made it over the Limp Jordan Bridge with our weapons, now buried in his garden. Had we taken too great a risk? There were so many near misses. What if the German soldier washing the windows had turned around to see me making off with the rifle? Would I have had to shoot him? Would I have known how? Was the rifle even loaded? What if the woman on the street had yelled for the police as we pedaled away? What if the German officer at Christine had moved his body to block my way out of the coat closet? But there were even more ominous thoughts crowding my brain for headline space as I tried to relax in my room. Eigel's older sister was a secretary with the Aalborg police. She was the only outsider who knew about us, and it was good to have a trusted mole embedded with the authorities. However, her news wasn't good. The German command had issued an ultimatum to Danish police. Either you identify and arrest whoever has been damaging our property and stealing our weapons, or we'll find them ourselves with drastic results for the criminals. If this continues, they were saying, Germany's infamous secret state police force, the Gestapo, will take over the policing of Aalborg. Eigel's sister said that 2 elite professional investigators had been sent up from Copenhagen and were now drawing closer every day. A witness from Café Halle, where he had lifted a German pistol, and 2 fishermen who had seen us steal weapons at the waterfront were directing investigators toward Cathedral School. Stop now, Eigel's sister pleaded. Lie low. She and her brother had a very strong personal interest at stake. Theirs was the only Jewish family among the Churchill Club members. Eigel feared that his arrest could lead to capture by the Nazis and death for his entire family. Overnight, Eigel had suddenly gone from pushing us to go out on missions every day to begging us to close down. His nerves were raw and his emotions were turbulent. Lying low was the last thing I wanted. Norwegians were still fighting and dying, and Danes were still singing folk songs and buying king's badges. We were still occupied. The Germans seemed more at home in Aalborg by the day. If I had to go down, I wanted to go down fighting like the hero of my fantasies. Flames flickered from the tiny stove in my room at the monastery. The German guard outside my window kept pacing robotically, back and forth. And finally, many hours after our meeting had concluded, I fell asleep.